It's Help for Moms and Dads of School-Aged Kids. I'm Danita Bailey.
And I'm David Bailey.
Today we're talking about trauma and its effect on students. Trauma is really more common than we realize. According to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Association, by the age of 16, more than 66% of children have experienced at least one traumatic event.
Some common experiences include bullying, loss of a loved one, divorce of parents, and life-threatening illness or accidents as well.
So, when you were teaching, did you experience any students that, or did you see any kids that had traumatic events?
Oh my goodness, yeah. I mean, I can go back to when I was in high school in my junior year, and one of our classmates died in a car accident.
That
And
happened to me too.
yeah, and it just rocked our whole world, and we were just in utter shock. And it was hard for my classmates to focus. I didn't know her really, really well, but the ones that I knew that knew her well, it really impacted them in a way that, it was hard for them to focus. I've seen kids that have been, physically abused. I've seen kids with,
When you were teaching?
yeah, when I was teaching, literally with slits on their arms, um, kids that have been sexually molested. I've had kids whose, abandonment by a parent that just said, "I don't want to be in your life anymore."
Oh my gosh.
And I remember one student, his dad didn't want him, and his mother died, and he was living with his grandparents. And I saw all of the overflow of that into the classroom as far as behavior goes, and so it really plays a big role.
And did you have to take special steps to kind of assimilate him back into the classroom?
Well, I met with the grandparent just to talk about, because when you see things, you see behavior, but you don't necessarily know the
Right.
story behind what's
Right.
going on. But once I heard the story, it gave me more compassion, because first I thought he was just clowning, like
Right.
this kid's just acting out in the classroom. And then when grandmother told me his story, my heart just broke for him. And
Perspective.
yeah, so what I learned is what you see isn't always what you see. A lot of times there's more to the story than what's going on outwardly.
That's
Yeah.
good. Well, before we go any further, let me just remind everybody that it does take a village. If you hear a great parenting tip or nugget of advice, make sure to share it with your parent friends. Facebook it, Instagram it, tweet it, link it in, and add the hashtag School Days Show and I Am School Days. And we also want you guys to be a part of the show. So if you have an experience that is relevant to what we're doing today, if you've experienced a traumatic experience or your child has, and you want to share your experience, or if you have a question of our guest, we want you to go ahead and call in. And that number is 214-431-5062. So, David, can you introduce our guest, please?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Michael Flores. Michael is the owner and director of Brighter Possibilities Family Counseling. Michael has worked in many settings, including nonprofit, treatment centers, and private practice. Brighter Possibilities currently has contracts with Tarrant County Juvenile Probation, where they provide counseling services for youth and their family. Brighter Possibilities also receives court orders from the Tarrant County Family Court to provide counseling for parents and children. Michael is the developer of Team Integrative Solution Focused Therapy, designed to work with at-risk youth and treatment providers. He is the proud father of 3 children and a blessed, or as we say, blessed husband. Yes.
That's correct.
Well, welcome, Michael.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks
having me.
being here.
Absolutely.
Well, let's just jump right in. Can you tell us what are some of the most common traumatic experiences that students and children experience?
Well, in my work, a lot of what I see is divorce. I think divorce is a big one. I think the death is another one. Actually, what's interesting, and I don't even know if we could call it a trauma, but sometimes it's the return of a parent. A parent's been absent for so long.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
the parent comes back years later and wants to integrate into their lives, and that in some ways can be semi-traumatic, because it's I've grieved you, I've let you go, and here you are, you've returned, and I don't know what to do with this or what to make of it. And it's that constant fear you could leave us again, you could. So sometimes people don't recognize that. You look at that and say, hey, they're back involved, that's a great thing. But for some kids, It's not. I've developed this way of dealing with it, and now you're back, and I'm not sure how to handle that.
Right.
So I view trauma more as it's more of an experiential thing. Like anything you value or you put meaning on, and if it's taken from you or removed, that typically can become a traumatic experience. So something for some person may not be traumatic, and something for someone else could be. It just depends on
That's
the
good to
value
know.
and meaning we put on those things.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So divorce, and what are some other common
Yeah,
things
divorce, death, I think that happens. It goes as far as even a friend. If some kids will come in and they'll talk with us about a friend that's hurting themselves, that you were talking about self-harming behaviors, that can be traumatic too, not sure how to help their friend. And some kids, they think, well, I'll join them, I'll cut too, and that way they're not alone, because we don't want anyone to feel alone. And a lot of kids do that. They kind of assimilate together and want to help each other, not sure how to do that. Or who do I tell? Do I tell a teacher? Do I tell a counselor? Well, they hate me if I go tell that they're having a problem, there's an issue they're having. So sometimes kids have that trauma too with friendships and relationships, and not wanting to hurt those or scar those things. So that can be traumatic. There are situations where kids need hospitalization. And what's really sad is I've seen where kids have gone into a hospital setting, and that's been traumatic, the experience there, because they've seen other things that are going on with other kiddos, and they're like, this is real life. So there's just so many areas that can occur in, and I think that's something we all have to consider.
Yeah.
So, what are some symptoms of trauma? Like, how would, from a parent's standpoint, would they recognize that there is trauma going on?
Sure. I think that there's a couple of areas. So if we look at things like attachment, the biology, their way of regulating affect, I think all those things are things you can look into. So things you might see is like boundary problems, suspiciousness, distrust. I think they'll have difficulties with other people and emotional states if they're put in highly emotional situations. Sometimes they act out. They either get really quiet or they do the opposite. I always tell parents, think of kids like on a dial, like on the boiling, like when you're putting a pot of water.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have a kid that comes in your classroom and they're at a 10 and they're boiling right away. They walk in and they're just at it. And not realizing, like you said, there's a story behind that.
Right.
I think the thing we have to consider is that all behavior has purpose, and we have to understand what the behavior means so that we understand how we can help it.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense there. Some of the biology things, things with coordination, balance, body tone, somatization, which is really kind of the somatic feelings. I think somatoform things are things that people don't realize is kids actually have physical pain. They'll complain of a tummy hurting or my head hurting, and not realizing that it's actually due to a nervousness or a fear. A lot of times what you find with trauma is a detachment. And I think kids will detach from certain things because they want to protect themselves. And that's sometimes the ways that they do that. And they do that in unhealthy ways. Get into adolescent stages, they may try drugs or alcohol or get involved in those things, not realizing they're trying to deal with some kind of event that occurred in their life, and they're trying to self-soothe. Yeah. So there's things like that to look for, if that gives you guys some insight on that.
Yeah. So how do you know? So it's my understanding that you can have a traumatic event and then recover from that well. But how do you know if your child needs to actually go into counseling?
That's a great question. I think for parents, the best thing I can tell them is trust their gut. I think a lot of times parents, we put so much pressure on ourselves. We don't want to be wrong. We don't want to miss it. We don't want to do all these things, so we're hyper vigilant to certain things, and sometimes we push too quick. But I would say if your gut tells you there's something here, I need to get this looked into, that's when I think you trust it into a professional. I think one of the things I like to tell parents, if you have a child that's 10 and younger, I would consider using what they use, which is play. I think they're play therapists, RPTs, and I'm not one of them, so I give them so much credit, but an RPT is able to go in and utilize a child's world, which is in the play world, as a way of helping to therapeutically assist them. So I think 10 and younger, utilize that as a strength and let the play kind of unfold. When a parent needs to decide whether or not they take their kid to counseling, I think it comes down to when your kid is detaching, they're not interacting, you see a major mood change, if they're having lots of complaints, it's okay to have them come on in. Let someone else take a swing at it just to check in. Sometimes someone like ourselves comes in. We're a non-threatening person. They may open up to us and talk to us about, their friends, a death. There was one little girl I worked with. Parents didn't understand what her behavior was. She was a straight A student. She always, was involved. She was a very likable kid. And one day she came to school and she just wasn't interacting. She was disengaging from people and everything. And it happened over the course of years. 3 years this happened. At the third year, the parents brought her in and said, hey, we're not sure what's going on, but this has been going on for about 3 years. Now, some of us may think that's a long time to wait, but in actuality, we weren't sure. So the parents wanted to move kind of at her pace. She came in to sit down, and the first thing she brought up to me was her grandfather.
Oh, no.
And I said, it's interesting. Tell me about your grandpa. He seems pretty meaningful to you. And she started to dialogue about him, and she started to tear up. And instead of saying, those are sad tears, they're happy tears, I just asked her what the tears meant. I noticed you're crying when you talk about your grandpa. What do those tears mean? She says, well, he passed away. And I said, yeah. I said, how have you dealt with that? And she says, I haven't. And so that's one of those things where you just kind of want to understand their world. And I think one of the things I tell teachers and parents and friends and whoever I'm talking to is, if you seek first to understand, then you'll be understood. And I think a lot of us, we try to fix everything rather than just saying, let me understand where they're coming from. Let me just see what this world looks like for a second. And I think that's necessary if you really want to be helpful.
I think that you bring up a really good point about grief, that, you know, everybody grieves differently. And just because it's been some time has passed does not mean that they're over it, especially if they haven't done any work to kind of to work through those feelings. So that's something to be mindful of. So can children who experience traumatic experience, can they go through kind of a grieving? What are kind of the signs of grieving or the stages of grieving?
Yeah,
really
there's a model by Kubler-Ross, which is the 5 stages of grief. And of course, as adults, we're going to deal with it a little differently than the kids are going to deal with it. But the 5 stages, I mean, you're going through depression, you're going through shock. These are not in order, by the way, but you're going through depression, shock, anger, bargaining, acceptance. These are all these different stages within the grief cycle. Children do it over a course of time. And because I think children already have this developed resiliency. See, a lot of things that as adults we lose track of. Kids learn how to live in the moment. So I guess I'll use my own story. My mother died when I was 4 years old to suicide. And I can remember being a child and growing up and, you know, just trying to figure out how to make sense of everything that happened. I mean, one day mom's there, one day she's not. And as I'm asking questions of my family, my father, there are all these different kinds of questions, but it happened over the span of about 16 years.
Wow.
So my grief cycle was a 16-year cycle, and it wasn't a rapid movement. It was kind of a healing for me. And I don't call it like, oh, you're grieving. You're healing. And it takes time. Everybody heals in a different way. And that was something, the one thing I respect my father for was that he never answered any question I asked that was more than what I asked for, because I wasn't ready for that yet. Yeah. I asked only what I was interested in. So if I said, hey, was I a good son? My dad would answer that question. But he wouldn't say, oh, by the way, your mom also this or that. He would just give me what I asked for. And that was at the end of the conversation. And I thought that was a pretty powerful way to handle it. Looking back and reflecting, I can see how he was letting me have my space so that I could get through the healing. Yeah. And I think that's something we have to respect in our children, is they have resiliency. Yes, they can be in the moment. But every now and then this little thing will creep in. Yes. Will be a question. They want to ask it. So answer it. Yeah. But just answer what they ask for. Don't give them more than that. Okay. Move at their pace. Okay. I think that's something we have to respect in our youth.
And so people that experience traumatic experiences that are not a death in the family, do they also go through a grieving process, so like a fire or something like that?
Absolutely. I think even losing a pet. You can think of a kid, you know, their goldfish dies. Right. And you have, and one of the things the parents did, I thought was they had a ceremony for the goldfish.
Like
and
the Cosby
we may
Show.
chuckle at that, but for the kid, it's meaningful. And remember what I was talking about earlier in trauma. If it has meaning and value, it can become a traumatic experience, or it can become a very beautiful experience because it has meaning and it has value. It's how that child values that thing. And so that goldfish means something to that child. So absolutely, it can be a pet. It could be a house fire. My house burnt down because that's my sacred place. Yeah. You know, so that house had meaning.
Place of safety.
Exactly. And I think that's what, you know, we have to honor with our children is if we don't put value on it, we're like, I don't know why they're stuck. It doesn't mean they don't have value in it. Does that make sense? Right. You know, you may not have been close to the fish, but the kid was, or a dog, or the house. You know, I was wanting to sell the house anyway. I'll get the insurance check. No, you know, the kids, that kid, that's their home.
Yeah.
You know,
that's
so
all they know.
It's about understanding them rather than trying to be understood.
Right.
And I think that's important for trauma.
So, I'm sorry. So what are some of the ways that parents can do this wrong with helping their children go through this process? What are some of the common mistakes that parents make along the way?
That's a great question, and I'll tell you why I like that question. I like the question not because I'm typically more what we can do right, but the reason I like the question is because so many parents want to know that answer. They want to know what am I doing wrong?
Yeah.
And what I tell them is, if you feel like you're doing too much, you're probably doing it wrong, because it shouldn't feel like you're doing too much. It has to move at their pace. I think that's the big key. Is sometimes we want to push the kids through it, because as a parent, think about it, or even as a teacher, when you see a kid who's struggling, it's hard for you too, because you feel like, I got to help them.
Yeah.
But they're already helping themselves. They don't want to feel that way either. They're working on their healing, but we just have to want to move with them, not for them, not force them, move with them. So one of the things I think parents do is they try to move them too quick. I think they try to enforce things, push things. They try to be logical. They try to teach them rather than listen to them. And I think that's something we have to do better in giving them a voice to let us tell us their story. You had talked about that in your past with a kid. Once you learn the story, you had a very different approach to that child.
Right.
And I think that's something we all have to do better as counselors, as parents, as teachers. We need to be able to do that better for our children. So one of the mistakes I would say is try to stay away from teaching. Try not to make them move at your pace, move at theirs. Honor their questions, but give them no more. Don't answer more than that. Let them ask things and let them process with you, but don't give them more than what they request, because sometimes you push them too quick or too far, and it just it makes it more confusing. It makes the process a little more difficult.
I think that's just a good rule of thumb with parenting anyway. Don't answer more than what they're asking.
Don't.
'Cause sometimes you're thinking with your adult mind, and they're just like, no, I just wanted to know, about the clouds. And that was really it.
That's correct.
And you went way too far.
That's it.
Yeah.
Just let them be in their world. And that's one of the things I've learned from some play therapists I've interacted with is they let them design their own world in play therapy. If they're doing sand tray, they let them come in and develop a world, and then they explain what the world is to them. So we're not guiding them, they're guiding us.
Right.
And that's part of their healing. And it's a beautiful thing if we can do that better and just trust that they'll work through that. And we just do it with them. I tell parents, you're like a training wheel on a bike. Your job isn't to make the bike move. Your job is to keep the bike upright.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So if the kid leans one way or the other, you catch them. But teach them how to pedal. They have to do the pedaling.
That's real good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how much of it, so if you've experienced the traumatic event with your child, how much of your feelings should you express to your child, or should you hide it, or how do you respond when you're dealing with it too?
Great question. I remember visiting the gravesite with my father, my mom's gravesite. My dad would take me there. We would take her flowers on he still calls me today and says, hey, it's Mom's birthday. Did you go by the cemetery? So he'll ask me those questions. But when I remember being a kid, I would kneel down and I would clean off the grave. I'd clean, like there would be some dirt on it or whatever, and I'd just wipe it off with my hand. And we would take the little vase that's in there and you'd fill it with water and put the flowers in. But my dad would wear his sunglasses. And one of the things I appreciated, and I never told him this, but he never wiped his tears away. He would just shield them. He didn't want me to see his red eyes. But I could see the tears running down his face. And I can only imagine, as a kid, I just knew he was missed. I thought he just missed my mom. But now that I've grown up and had my own children, I think he was sad for me too.
Yeah.
And he was thinking about what I would miss out on and what I was going to need along the way. And so to answer the question, I think you let your kids know that it does hurt and it's okay. But I want you to make sure that you let your kids know that you're working through it too, and that you're going to get through it. They need to feel like they have the security of knowing mom and dad's going to be okay. The scariest thing is sometimes kids think they have to take care of their parents.
Yeah.
And we call that parentification. When a kid is parentified, they become the parent to the parent. And when they do that, the child doesn't get to go through their own emotion. They don't get to go through their own development, their own healing, because they're trying to help the parent get there, because that's their security. Does that make sense? That's where the stability is. So when that's no longer happening, I see this with divorce, by the way, but when that's no longer happening, the kid parentifies and takes that parental role.
That's
and that
so
puts the kid in a traumatic, that's another trauma.
It's trying to be the adult.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so
With no skills.
So watching my dad deal with that emotion and not hiding it from me, to me, it was like, hey, he feels what I feel. There was a way we could connect on it, but my dad was still secure enough to take care of me.
Right.
I didn't have to take care of him, if that makes any sense. And that was helpful, more helpful now that I've realized it than I was when I was a child. because I'm a kid. What was I interested in? I was interested in the moment, in
Right.
being where I was. My dad was thinking about my future, my past. He was thinking about all those other
Yeah.
things, and his ability to deal with it himself and process it allowed me to know that I could too. And it was kind of a guide. It acted as a guide for me.
Yeah.
So I think parents shouldn't shield that. They should allow themselves to do that, but don't make it the kid's responsibility to care for them.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, this has me thinking about when, you've heard people say this before, say especially if there's like a young man in the house, a young boy, and they'll say, well, you have to be the man of the house.
Yes.
You hear that all the time, and I was just thinking about this, and yeah, that's hard.
That's too much responsibility.
It's too much, right?
Well,
for a child.
and think of a child. Do they know what that means?
No.
The child doesn't know what it means. So they spend all this time trying to figure out what that is and have no clue. And so they go through their life thinking, I have to do these things, but what about them? You know what I mean?
Right.
So they all that is emptied. They don't get to deal with their own stuff. And so I have a divorce case that I'm working with, and the kid came in to see me, and he told me exactly that. At 5 years old, his bio father had committed suicide. And the mom could not tell the child. She was just, I don't know how to tell my son what happened to his father. And so the family friend came in, and I know he was just trying to be helpful, but the family friend comes in. This kid's 14 now. I think he's 14, maybe 15, but he's an adolescent. But the family friend comes in to meet with him and says, I need to tell you what happened. And he says, I want you to do me a favor. I want you to look in the sky and find the brightest star. And so he looks up, and he sees a star in the sky, and he says, okay, you see that star there, the one you picked out that's the brightest? That's your dad looking down on you. And he goes, okay, kind of a little confused. And then he told him what happened. Your dad had passed away. He's in heaven with Jesus. And then he told him in return, he said, I want you to know that you're the man of the house now. And so for all those years, he carried that. So he's made it his responsibility to care for his sister, to care for his mom, and he's carried that burden all the way. So,
Yeah.
and now I think about it, I'm telling a story. He's actually an adult. I think he's in his 20s. He's not a
Wow.
15-year-old, but he was telling me about the constant burden he's had to carry, regarding being the man of the house. And what does that mean? And I asked him, what does it mean to be the man of the house? He didn't know.
Some adults don't understand that. You know?
Yeah.
I mean, that's hard to understand
go ask my wife.
right. You know?
Right.
Yeah.
Certainly not a
House man.
teenager.
Right.
Right.
Great
Yeah.
point. Yeah.
Goodness, and that has me thinking about even, burdens and responsibilities that sometimes kids have in homes where maybe both parents are working, and an older sibling has to take care of a younger sibling,
Right.
and the burden of basically parenting their siblings versus just being siblings with their siblings, or working. If they don't work, then the family doesn't eat.
That's right.
You see that a lot.
Yes.
Where a lot of people, the kids, they go to schools and they go right after they're done, and they go straight to work. They work until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, and then they're expected to, have and then to keep on going and maintain their grades and all the other stuff as well. I wanted to go in a different direction.
Go ahead.
So I think that you can think of these traumatic experiences as, I was kind of more coming into this thinking more of the big things, but what you're saying is there's a lot of different factors that affect it. So I think a lot more people are going through trauma and may not even realize it.
Correct.
That's happening in their lives. How does that impact learning? So with all this going on, if it's a pet or if it's a loss of a loved one or, whatever it is. So now they still, as a teacher, I still have to teach the content, and they still have to pass the test and do the assignments. But knowing, and I saw it in some of their eyes, I saw kids that were really, really troubled. And but academically, life has to still go on. So how does it impact learning?
That's a great question. And, I've worked in the classroom as a behavior interventionist really about 2 years. So being specifically in a classroom, that's about as long as I've had in one dealing with the behavioral issues and things of trauma that have occurred.
Yeah.
And I worked in an alternative setting. So you're talking about we were
Right.
the only alternative elementary school in Tarrant County at the
Oh,
time
my.
for Fort Worth ISD. And so they would send these kids to us, the elementary program, and being the behavior interventionist and in the classrooms and then the lead BI, I would see so much of that. And so I
Yeah.
saw how the learning was impacted. And kids would get behind and they would act out. Sometimes I had, you'll have kids that, this one kid, I'll never forget this story. He was actually in juvenile justice alternative education, so JJAP is what that's short for. And what I can recall in his story, of course I won't share names, but in his story, he was always coming out of the class. Every morning he'd come in and he was sitting outside the classroom. And I walked by and I said, hey, man, you've been doing this for like the whole week and you've been out of class, so you keep getting in trouble. So what's up? I just wanted to ask him. I was trying to let him kind of get his way, get his way through it. And he said, I don't know. She don't like me. Teacher don't like me. And I was like, I don't know if I believe that.
Oh, I heard that
So
all the
yeah,
time.
teacher don't like
Yeah.
me, right? So I said, well, I'll look into it for you. I said, but can I call you over here for a second? I want to talk to you private. So I pulled him in private, and I really went fishing. And what I mean by that is I just guessed. I didn't have anything to go off of other than I just want to see what he gives me. And I looked at him and I said, hey man, I think what's really going on is I think that you're struggling with your work. You don't know how to do it, and you don't want anybody to know.
Oh, yeah.
And so it's easier to come in, act out, get kicked out of class because God forbid anybody know that you don't know what you're doing.
Right.
I said, but this is just what it feels like for me. I could be wrong. He starts crying on me. And he said, Mr. Flores, how did you know?
Aw.
And I didn't. So I looked at him and I said, you know what, man? It's because I really want to help you. I said, would you let me do that? And he said, well, how can you help me? I said, well, do you want to graduate? He said, yeah. He can't read.
How old was this kid?
He's a freshman. He's supposed to be a senior.
Wow.
And he was in a freshman classroom. Yeah. And he can't read. And so you think about what they push. They push the state testing and,
Yep.
and all those things in public settings, and he can't read. And so only thing he knew to do is I'll just act out, and
Yeah.
then hopefully they won't want to deal with my behavior, and they'll just move me through.
Yeah.
They'll kind of push me on. So
Right.
no one took the time. But I understand teachers can't do that. They got all their kids to teach. And so as a behavior interventionist, I felt it was my responsibility to try to figure out how do I connect the two between behavior and education and put them together. And that was
Yeah.
kind of my job. And so what I was able to find out is I asked him one question. I said, of all the teachers in your school here, I said, which one do you really connect with most? And it was his math teacher. And so I asked the math teacher to come in, and I said, hey, is it okay if I share with him kind of what we've talked about a little bit? He said, sure. So I told him the situation. And I'll never forget what he did. He looked at him and he said, you really want to graduate? He said, yeah. He said, I want you to come to school early, and I want you to stay with me late every day, all through the semester, and I think I can get you caught up. I think I can get you where you need to be. If you're willing to do that, I'll do that for you. And I remember turning to him and asked him, why are you willing to do that? He says, because he cares.
Wow.
And so one of the things I think we as teachers, have to do is go back and remember that we have to care about them first. The
Yeah.
relationship is the most powerful thing we have to offer them. And when the kids are in the classroom, if they feel safe and they feel like they're cared for, they feel like you care about them, like they matter to you,
Yeah.
they'll let you in. And they'll actually do it for you. They may not even do the education for themselves, but
Right.
they'll do it for you
Yeah.
because you care about them and they don't want to let you down. And so that's one of the things I tell teachers is build that relationship. That is your everything. I'm going to give kudos to my wife real quick. She was a kindergarten teacher, and one of the things I remember she was telling me is the kids like to give front hugs, and the schools want you to do it on the side. Right? They don't want anything misinterpreted.
Right.
A child does not hug you for misinterpretation. They hug you because they care,
Yeah.
and they want to know you care back.
Yeah.
And one of the things my wife did well, she says, I hope I don't get fired, but I hug my kids in the front. They come up to me and they hug her, and she just hugs them right back. But those kids know she cares. My wife hardly ever sent a kid to the principal's office for behavior because she could deal with it, because the relationship was there. And
Yeah.
I think that's the thing is I love to encourage teachers. I know it's hard, but start with something simple as just greeting every kid by name at the front door before they walk in your classroom. Hey, Johnny, nice to see you. Glad you're here today, buddy. Like that shirt. Hey, Sally, great shoes you got on today. Or, one of the kids walks in, they're a little down, not usually down. Hey, Richard, you going okay, bud? Oh, yeah, I'm fine, Mrs. So-and-so. And then what you do is you let her in, you check in on that kid, call him to the side when everybody's busy working. Say, hey, Richard, I know you came in kind of sad, man. Is there anything I can do for you?
Yeah.
Just let them know you care. Just let them know I noticed, I'm here, I want to know if I can help. And if you can do it, and if you can't help, use your resources. School counselors are not used like they're supposed to. The school counselors are trained in the same way I'm trained to be able to understand these things. And I think if we can coordinate that better, I think they can be a huge help to the classroom.
Yeah.
You know?
Are they a good first step before getting counseling? Going out and hiring a counselor? Yeah.
Yeah, I hate to put more work on the school counselor, but yes.
Yeah.
Because they're like they're your front line.
Yeah, and they're there.
Correct.
Yeah.
So teachers spend more time with the kids sometimes than parents do, because parents work and do those kinds of things. So you think about it. How many hours are kids in school? Is it 7-8 hours a day? Is that about right?
Yeah, it depends upon, they have stuff after school as well, so it can be longer than that. Yeah.
So you think 5 days a week, that's 35, that's a work week, 35, 40 hours a week. That's where they're spending their time.
Right.
So the teachers probably know them a lot better than some parents do. I hate to say that, but it's true sometimes.
Yeah.
And so I would say utilize the resource. The teachers are a great start, but I don't want to put pressure on them. They're not trained to look at those things. What I would say is, if you see something, you sent something, let the school counselor know. Let them take a swing at it.
Yeah.
Because they may pick up on something that we can't pick up on. And I wish school counselors could do that more. Because I think that it may keep them out of my office as much. That may be a good, like you said, Danita, it's a good first step. So
let's take a second to say, if anybody has any questions or you want to share your experience, please feel free to call in. Our number is 214-431-5062. Michael, I hear this buzzword, trauma-sensitive schools. What does that mean, and how does that look?
Wow, what a question. Trauma-sensitive. I think that my understanding of trauma-sensitive is kind of more being mindful and being aware of the fact that trauma does exist and it does play a part in the learning. And so I think being a trauma-sensitive school in my opinion, is the idea that you're going to consider those factors when you consider the learning environment. And so I think it's great, but I think trauma has a negative impact. I think when you say the word trauma, we think of something negative. Trauma is an experience, and it's how someone plays that experience out. Like I said earlier, someone could have the same experience, and it's not a trauma for them versus a trauma for someone else, if that makes any sense. So I think we need to be more clear on, I think everybody should be trauma informed. You know what I mean? And what that basically means is, hey, everybody's going to have some kind of trauma in their lifetime, whether it be young, in the middle, at an older age, but we're all going to go through some kind of loss, something we value, something that has meaning is going to be taken from us because change happens. And if we can just say, hey, we know, we understand, and be more informative, I think people know it's normal. And I think that's the thing, is we don't think it's normal. Oh, I had a trauma. This thing happened to me, right? And it doesn't happen to anyone else. Well, no, that's not actually true. It happens to a lot of people. It's just different. But it doesn't mean it doesn't happen. And I think it needs to be more normalized so that people know that it's okay if you go through something and you can work through it. This is where groups are helpful. A lot of kids benefit from group counseling or group, having a group in the school and saying, hey, we're going to have this group in the school just to talk about whatever you feel is appropriate, but letting a counselor run it. And really treating it as more of a information gathering, almost like a psychoeducational, not necessarily more of a therapeutic. Let's really dig in and figure out what your story is. I think kids are not going to always share that,
Right.
But letting them know, hey, I'm not the only one.
Yeah,
that can be therapeutic in itself.
Yeah, because you can feel so isolated when you're experiencing something like that.
Isn't
but
that
to
true?
see kids that are your age and you can relate to. Also, I feel like this as an adult sometimes, just to know that that I'm not weird,
That's the best way to say it. I'm not weird. Yeah.
I may be weird, but
that's right.
But I'm not weird by myself.
Exactly. I'm not alone being weird, right? Yeah.
Right.
And maybe they change weird to different. Yeah, I'm not weird, but I'm different.
Yeah.
And being different's okay, being weird's not. And so it's that stigma. And you're right. You get them in a group setting, and the kids realize I'm not the only one.
Yes.
And that's a powerful message.
Very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you seen schools inappropriately deal with trauma?
I'm going to say yes and no to that question. I think there's been times when that has happened, but I don't think it was intentional. And I'm going to say no because I also believe that a lot of times we're just doing the best we can and we know. I feel bad. I feel like teachers don't get enough training on it.
Yeah.
They're not trained enough to know, what do I look for? What's the behavior? And it's not fair to them. It's not fair to put all that pressure and say, oh, you got that kid that was in your class and you did that wrong. The teacher's just doing the best they can and trying to accomplish what's on that plate. And that here, my wife made a good point to me one day. She said, it's like, think of a teacher having a plate, and it's like a Thanksgiving plate. It's full of everything, right? All the things they have to get done in a given year, and the kids have to be doing certain things by the end of certain either semesters, trimesters, or the year,
Right.
whether it be reading and comprehension. But they have this plate full, and what ends up happening is nothing gets removed from the plate. Stuff gets added, and they can't consume all that. And I think
Right.
teachers have a hard time, and that's where I feel for them. And so the best thing I can tell teachers is trust your gut. move at their pace, and always remember the relationship is the most important thing you have. What we do know about trauma is safety matters. If the child feels safe, you have everything because they give you so much. So create that environment for them. And the best you can do that in your classroom. I think that's the most powerful thing you can do.
Yeah. So how can parents help their children maneuver through the academic responsibilities that they have when they come home? Because even with all this going on, they go to school all day and they still have work to do at night, and the work doesn't go away just because they're going through a traumatic experience. So how would you encourage parents to support their children from the home front?
That's a great question. I think depending on the age of the child, I think the younger they are, the more resilient they seem to be. The older they get, they kind of there's more of a burden that they put on themselves. Going back to Eric Erickson, his stages, and I'm going to go through some of these real quick. Eric Erickson, his stages, the first couple stages in infancy from 0 to about a half year age or a year and a half is trust versus mistrust. So the kid's really developing, can I trust you or can I not? You know what I mean? And that's the very first stage. It's so important. I mean, that's from when they cry, do you attend to them? When they're hungry, do you attend to them? So that's stage 1. Autonomy versus shame, initiative versus guilt. These are all the stages. Industry versus inferiority. So when you get to the school age, 5 to 12, you have industry versus inferiority. That's a competency issue. Am I good enough? Can I do this? So imagine having a trauma at that age, right? You're trying to heal from, and at the same time, you're trying to figure out if you're competent. So all of a sudden, we think we can treat the kid as he's not competent, but continually forget that there was this major trauma that occurred,
right?
And that's what's putting the pressure here. Best thing parents can do is remember pacing is important. I think when a kid comes home with homework, assignments, or certain things they have to achieve, is asking the kiddo, do you feel a lot of pressure right now? Just trying to check in with them, see where they're at with it.
Yeah.
And try to modify that. If it's easier for them to do the work in the morning than it is at night before school, and they actually can do that, then try that. Because sometimes we think they come home and they got to get right to work. Well, they got to come home and they got to get their brain settled.
Right.
And probably put some food in their mouth. I think one of the things we forget is a child not eating is a significant sign of something. Because typically when we're hungry, we eat. I mean, you think if everything's going okay, you usually eat. When you're ill, physically ill, it changes your eating habits.
Right.
So I think eating habits are things to look at. I think one of the things is when kids aren't nourished appropriately, they don't learn appropriately.
Right.
And so I mean, this is weird that I'm saying this, but I think parents need to consider that when the kids come home is, nourishing them, talking with them, asking about the stresses that they may have, and even ask questions like how they're overcoming some of that stuff. Because sometimes there's exceptions in that. When you say, tell me how you dealt with that in class today. I know you were thinking a lot about Grandpa. Let's say Grandpa died. You're thinking about Grandpa.
Right.
Yeah, how'd you deal with that today? Oh, it was really cool. Miss So-and-so said this, and that made me think about this. Or we were doing this really fun project today and working hands-on. I think the parents sitting down with their kids and doing it with them is a great way to distract.
Yeah.
I think parents sometimes just expect them to do the work and they walk away.
Just
I gotta
hop
go clean
to
the
it,
dishes.
right.
I gotta make dinner. Do it with them. Because if you're involved with them, that security is there.
Yeah.
And that lets the kid know that it's okay. So I would say work with them. A lot of parents tell me, I don't know how to do math. I hadn't done that in years. I said, well, guess what? They can teach you because 90% of whatever they teach, they're going to retain.
Right.
So let them teach you how to do it again.
That's great.
Yeah. And so what does that do? That connects you to your kid.
Yeah.
It reestablishes that security for them. And that allows the kid to say, I can do this work, and I don't have to be so consumed by the experience of the event that occurred. Sometimes you can't do that. The experience was so intense that they can't disassociate the two things. And that's when you look at treatment. Bring them in, let someone help them with some coping and kind of working through that and kind of train the parents. I think one of the things we don't do well as counselors is we'll work with the client. They'll say, fix my kid. And we don't ever bring the parent in and say, well, you're part of the fixing.
Yeah.
Right.
We're all working together here. And there's not really a broken piece. We have to work together to help the child heal because that's what they're working toward. They're not broken. They're healing.
Right.
Makes sense?
Yeah.
So,
and it's important to know what they're working on so that you can support that at home because you're going to be with them way more than the counselor is.
Yeah. If you don't know how to do the work, just let them teach you how to do it. And the kid goes, I don't know how to do it either. Well, I guess we're going to learn together.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And what does that do to your child? What does that? It also puts the onus on saying, hey, look, your schoolwork is important and it's so important. I'm going to do it with you. I want to work with you on this because I want to learn it too.
Yeah.
And it encourages the learning. And I think
Yeah.
that's a great thing that parents can do to help their children. And I think, trust me, I think teachers would love it. I think teachers would be like, oh my gosh, I got parents that are involved with this process.
gosh.
Right.
They take on so much responsibility. They think they're the only teachers of the kids, and that's not true.
Yeah. We're their main teachers and their first teachers.
We are.
Yeah.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
From the womb. Let me ask you, how do you know when it makes sense to return them back to school after something has happened?
Oh, wow. What a great question. I don't have a specific answer to say, hey, when you see this, they can go back to school, or when you see that. I think what you do is, you do a slow process. I think it's great if you have, let's say a trauma occurs and you know the kid's not handling it well. This is where I think a parent can schedule a meeting with the school counselor and the child and develop a plan. Because what I've learned helps kids is when they know what to expect, they feel secure. Mm-hmm. And remember that security is so important for children. So what I like to do is it's kind of like a reintroduction of the child into the program and saying, hey, we're not here to talk about the trauma. We're here to talk about a plan so that we can help our daughter or our son be successful when they return to school. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense? Because I think ignoring it is not the right way to do it either. And just saying, hey, you got to go to school. It's necessary. You got to go and push them through it. But I think it's also to say, hey, utilize the resource. School counselor would love to say, hey, you brought your kid in. This thing happened. I see that. I'll check in on them. But let's make a plan on how to help them during the school day when they're here. If something comes up and they're having a rough day or they're struggling on something, the school counselor understands where it's coming from. Everybody's on the same page.
Right.
And that seems to be really helpful for
So
kids.
encouraging the parents to have that dialogue with their teachers, with the counselors.
Yes.
Let them aware of where they're at.
Yeah, this occurred.
Yeah.
We're not sure how significant it is, but if you see anything going on in the classroom, this might be part of what's going on. Just want to make sure everybody's aware, and let's see if we can develop a plan on how we're going to help.
Yeah, I know.
son
I was
daughter.
always appreciative of that. If a parent said, "Hey, their grandfather died," so just be mindful of if you see anything going on, it's probably going to be because of this.
Yep.
So those conversations really help me. Versus just thrusting them back and saying, "Okay, get back to school, get back to work,"
Right.
and move on.
Yes, sir.
And then sometimes I know for me it was always kind of awkward, because you don't really know where the child's at. So I would just check and say, hey, how are you doing? Are you okay? If there's anything I can do, let me know, or just welcome back. We're so glad to have you back in the classroom as well, to try and help them to be as comfortable with the transition as possible.
So I want to ask you, from a teaching perspective,
Uh-huh.
do you sometimes see that when the kids have a great relationship with their teachers and they have that security, they have this, let's say they have this death, he's using grandpa, hey, grandpa died, and the kid actually looks forward to coming back to school to get into a regular routine again.
Yeah.
Have you found that to be possible too, that's actually helpful to them sometimes?
Yeah. I mean, because sometimes just the heaviness of the situation, being around it so much, coming back to school, it gives them a break.
Yes.
Yeah.
From the situation. Not that they're running from it, but when you're in it 24/7.
Right.
Now when you're coming back, just getting back to a routine.
Correct.
Interacting with their friends again, and
Normalcy.
Right. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So at least for a little while, this window of time when they're at school, that they can just move on throughout the day, because they know when they go back home, to
They're
some
back in
extent,
it.
they're right back in it again.
Yeah.
So it can be a relief as well.
Yeah.
See, and I think that goes back to the question: when do you return them? I think you let things be normal. Don't try to make them abnormal. But if there's a significant issue that is going to impede their learning, then let's get a plan in place and let's get the right people involved. I think the teacher and the school counselor can be a good advocate for that.
Speaking of getting a plan in place, are there services and accommodations that you can put into place with an IEP or a 501 as a result of traumatic experiences?
Oh yeah, 504 plan.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great question. I've been in a part of some of those meetings, and it's really amazing because it's almost like a creative session. It's a session designed to get creative on how do we help little Johnny or Susie. It's always Johnny and Susie. Have you noticed that?
Right.
Poor Johnny and
There's
Susie.
a lot of them.
Yeah. If I ever have a client named Johnny or Susie, I'm like, there you are.
I don't know. I don't even know. I don't know one Susie. Do you know one Susie?
Yeah.
Suzanne.
Suzanne?
Probably, yeah.
Did she go by Susie? No.
Yeah, I don't know. Anyway.
Anyway, I'm sorry about that. It always seems to happen that way.
Right.
But yeah, going back to your question, I think that the plan can be developed in saying we want to target these areas, but in reality is it's for educational use. It's
Right.
not for therapeutic use. It's
But
saying
if it's affecting your education, can
Correct.
they do a 504 for
I
you?
believe they can.
Yeah.
From what I've seen, I've had kiddos, because here's the thing. Whether you call it a trauma or not, it still could be for the child. You may just say, hey, mom and dad divorced. He's having some struggle in school. Let's have a 504 meeting.
Yeah.
Right? And let's develop a plan. You're developing an educational plan, but you're really targeting that experience. Does that make sense? So yes, to answer your question, I believe yes, you can.
Yeah.
But they're not going to call it that. They're going to do an educational meeting over it.
Yeah, everything is absolutely has to be affecting the child's education.
Absolutely.
But as we're seeing, and there talk about some of the effects like memory loss and other things that you would
Yes.
see that are going to affect your education.
See, this is where it's interesting because I'm almost wondering. This is a theory. I'm hypothesizing. I'm not sure how accurate this is without going back and looking, but I'm thinking about my own experiences and everything else. There are some memories of my mother I don't have, and some I do. And I remember I was 4, and so some of them really stick out for me, and some I've let go of. But if I see a picture, I reflect on it. And I think what that is it's not necessarily maybe memory loss. It's almost like the brain's way of protecting the child. So it lets go of that memory. Make sense? Like it doesn't shelve it. It says it's not that it's gone. It's just it moves it away, because that focusing on that memory is so painful and hurtful. I don't want to focus on it, so I'm going to take you this direction. Does that make sense? So sometimes I'm wondering if memory loss is really a design by the brain to protect the child.
Could be, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
not saying I'm 100% accurate in that, but I'm wondered if that's possible as well.
Yeah, I remember losing my best friend to cancer, and this was the first time I'd really ever grieved someone close to me, and I could not remember things at all. My memory was just shot for a little while, for probably 3 months.
Yeah.
So I can imagine that would be difficult for children if they experience that with grief.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and the thing that we've learned too is the intensity of the trauma is typically from the reflecting. So my wife told me this the other day. She says, is it true? She asked me, is it true that an emotion only lasts 90 seconds? And I said, I couldn't, maybe. I said, I can see how that's not false. So you think about when we scroll through Facebook or Instagram, you see a funny video or something, it only lasts really about 90 seconds. You either share it or you move on from it, but you're done.
Yeah, you don't keep them laughing 5 minutes later.
Right, or someone brings it up
Sometimes I
later, you
do.
might, but because it's momentary. But,
Right.
But I think what's funny about it is the reason that they stick with us is the continual reflecting. Our brain's reflecting on that experience over and over and over and over and over again. And
Right.
that's, I think, how it traumatizes us.
Yeah.
Because it's
Right.
sticking over and over and over and over.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, I think of like accommodations, like maybe like redirection.
Mm-hmm.
If a kid, like to your point, if someone's thinking about something, I've seen kids that are they're physically in the room, but they're so far
Yeah.
away because of something that they may be reflecting on
That's
as
right.
well. So this is kind of new to me as well.
Mm-hmm.
But would you encourage parents to talk with a counselor about the academic effects it could have to see if they could qualify for accommodations? Would that be a next step?
It's possible. I think my fear with trying to, because my understanding is once a kid gets into getting accommodated in 504, that sticks with them all the way. Makes sense.
Well, if they don't already have that.
If they don't already have it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like needing to get one
It-
as a result of a traumatic
I know
experience.
in special with special ed,
With
with
special
the,
ed.
with the IEPs, that's ongoing. The 504, that's
Situational?
Yeah, it's situational from year to year.
Right, and I think that's my point with this is it's an experience that happened. It's a situational thing. I believe that healing will occur and it will be over time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I don't want to put the kids stuck in a because I think that's what they look for. A lot of times I feel like kids are looking for something to hold on to and say this is what's wrong with me.
Uh-huh.
And it makes me sad because what about what's right with you?
Right.
They
Yeah.
get so caught up on that, and you're going to hear depression and anxiety, and so what I think we have to do to go back to your question is, I think it's great to have the 504, have the meeting, have the dialogue, but let's not make it about their problem. Let's make
Right.
it about what we're helping them heal.
Yeah.
Use a different word. So while we're
Yeah.
working on healing, right, rather than while we're working on your trauma.
Right. right.
have a different way to
For sure.
state that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Because I think that does something to our brains because of the stigma and when we say trauma, we think negative. You know what I mean? When we say
Right.
healing, we think progression. You know what I mean? So
Right,
we have to
right.
use the right words, I think. And I think if it's done that way, I think it's very powerful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to consider.
So we have about one more minute. I would
Okay.
like to know if you can quickly do this.
I'll do this as fast as I can.
As parents, how do we build resilience in our kids to help them recover well from traumatic experiences? Because as we said, most of us are going to experience one. So are there things that we can do to help them kind of bounce back?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you have to start with their strengths first. I think that a lot of times we forget that children are already built resilient. They are so in the moment. They are like, I mean, think about it. A kid can be Superman at one point, and then they're, SpongeBob at another point, and that can be all in a span of 10 minutes. And they really believe that they're these characters. I remember putting on a towel and thinking, oh, Superman going to jump off, my grandma's porch, even though I thought it was high. It wasn't that high now. But it's that idea that the kids already have that in them. And so one of the things we do as parents is we have to acknowledge it's there. And we also have to be willing to move at their pace with them. So one of the things you can do if you want to really teach them something is sometimes talk about how you work through things. It's okay to say, hey, I remember one time tell a story. I was really sad when Grandma died, and I remember Grandpa was really awesome. I used to go visit Grandpa more often, and he would tell me stories about Grandma, and we'd laugh, and that made it feel better.
Right.
Tell the kids stories about how you dealt with your own struggle, because then they know it's okay. Remember, it's that thing is I don't want to be weird, right? I want to be different. But sharing with them like, hey, it's normal. We go through things. And I remember dealing with that. My dad crying and letting the tears come out. It was okay to cry. That was that.
Right.
He doesn't probably realize that. But to me, it was him saying, you can grieve your mother. It's okay. He's not wiping the tears away like I can't let you see it.
Right.
He's got his glasses on. Don't look at my red eyes. But here's the tears coming out underneath the glasses. So I think one thing parents can do is kind of let the kids know that it's okay. I'm here with you. I can share stories about how I got through things, and that's typically the lesson. Don't tell them how to do it. Share with them how you got through it.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
That's good.
Yeah.
And one final thought. We had a friend who last summer had a fire. Her house was a total loss, and she has 2 young boys, and she went through great pains to make sure that they continue to have some sort of normalcy. She continued to have play dates in the neighborhood that their house was in, and she spoke to the school, and she put a lot of things in place to help them to recover well. But one thing she forgot to do is to help herself. And so she was saying that now, they're back in the house now, and, it's been completely redone and everything, and all is good. But one thing I want to remind parents is to remember to help yourself, kind of like on the airplane.
That's right.
When you put your mask on first. Yeah. Don't forget this. If you experience with them, you need to also take care of yourself and seek counseling if that's something that you think that would be helpful.
It's a great point. I think the thing I tell people is if your cup is empty, you have nothing to offer.
Yeah.
So you got to fill your cup. And,
Right.
and if you fill your cup with some of your own healing, you can share that healing and that processing with your children. My dad was healing as I was healing. We were doing it together.
Yeah.
I wasn't his responsibility to heal. It was mine, and he wasn't mine. And we kind of shared that responsibility together,
Right.
but I wasn't alone. And I think that's what I would say is it's okay. I think parents don't think it's okay. I can't hurt. Actually, it's the best thing to do is say, hey, I'm hurting, but I'm getting through it.
Yeah.
That's the best thing you can do, because then the kids go, it's okay.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't want the kids to think that they're responsible for taking care of your hurt.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You just want to try to
Right.
make sure that doesn't happen.
All right. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time.
Okay.
Thank you so much for joining
Thank
us. This
you.
has been a great conversation. I
has.
think really helpful for some parents that are dealing with this or that might deal with this in the future. As always, we want to let you guys know what's happening with Noggin. We developed a visual schedule that you can download from our website. If your child has a tough time, like our kids do sometimes, staying on task, getting ready in the morning and in the evening when they get home, you'll really want this. This provides 26 images to choose from, and what you do is you hang them up and they pull them off the wall as they accomplish them. And this really helped. This helped our son that has autism greatly, and he doesn't even use it anymore. He said that it's in my brain now.
Is that cool?
Yeah,
it's in my
really
brain
cool.
now. Like it's
in
like
my brain
yeah,
now.
that's
Yeah,
great.
all the pictures are in my brain. So
love
you
that.
can download that for a $10 donation to Noggin Educational Foundation on our website, schooldazedshow.com. So David, what's happening with Noggin Educational Coaching?
So, just launched. Well, I opened it up a little while ago, but on Facebook, there's a new Facebook group. It's an open group, so anyone can join. It's called Empowering Parents for Academic Success. The whole purpose of the site, of the group, is to bring parents together to go through this journey of learning with one another and providing resources. I'm going to provide lots of resources for parents as well. Parents can come in and engage with one another to share with each other what their struggles are. Hey, this is how I worked through this. Hey, have you thought about this as well? So we're literally just getting this off the ground. We have like 20 some odd people right now, so we're growing each week. But I want to encourage every parent, if you are on Facebook, especially if you're on Facebook Live, and anyone else who has a Facebook account, empowering parents for academic success. I want to encourage you to get in, plug in, join in, and let's go through this thing together, because we all need each other to help us get through this journey of parenting and helping our child to be the best they could possibly be.
And we'll have a link on our website for that.
Sure, yes.
I'll put that on there.
Okay, thank you, Darren.
So next week's show is going to be super fun. What's happening?
So next week is our Kid Takeover. This is our spring break show, and my co-host will be Hunter Paris, who is a junior at Argyle High School. And we'll talk to 13-year-old Ali Baran and 10-year-old Ava Sanchez about their experience with school. So it'll be me and a bunch of young people up here taking over the mics and sharing their perspectives on what they wish parents knew from a child's point of view. So we're excited about that.
Yeah, that's going to be good. So as always, head to our website, schooldaysedshow.com, for more information. And remember, you don't ever have to miss a show. You can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Music, and Stitcher, and Intune, I think. So, and always follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We share a lot of information about parenting as relates to school, and just tips and sometimes some inspiration, and of course information about School Dazed Show. So go to @Noggin, Noggin Foundation, and find us on social media. And last of all, we always want to end by saying David and I are parenting by grace. We depend on God to give us the wisdom and strength we need to raise our kids into flourishing adults. And if you would like to know more about that, email us at info@schooldaysedshow.com. Have a great week.